I am Eleanor Hayes, 67 years old, from a quiet town in Ohio where people still wave when they pass on the street. That morning, I stood in front of the mirror holding the sweater I had knitted for my grandson Ben's 5th birthday. The pale blue yarn was soft under my fingers, and I had stitched his initials near the collar, thinking of his laughter with every loop. It felt like carrying a piece of my heart in a small gift bag. I dressed in my nicest black dress, a simple cotton one I had saved for family occasions, and left for my son David's home with a mix of excitement and unease. When I reached the driveway, my chest tightened. The house looked more like a small mansion than a family home, with polished stone steps and glass doors that gleamed in the late afternoon sun. Inside, I could already hear voices, the clinking of glasses, and a kind of laughter that did not sound welcoming. I rang the doorbell and waited, adjusting the scarf around my neck, hoping David would greet me with that warm smile he had as a boy. Instead, Madison opened the door. Her expression was perfectly composed, her manicured hand gripping the doorframe, as if she owned the entire world. She looked me over from head to toe and sighed. "Oh, you are here," she said in a tone that carried the weight of unwelcome judgment. I smiled politely and lifted the bag. "I brought something special for Ben's birthday." She did not move to let me in. Her eyes flicked to the dress I wore, and I saw the corner of her mouth curl almost like she found me amusing. "David is still getting ready. The other guests have already arrived." I blinked, confused. David had told me this would be a small dinner with just family. My fingers tightened around the handles of the gift bag as she stepped aside. The living room was filled with people dressed in sharp suits and glittering dresses. Diamonds caught the light from a crystal chandelier above, and the air smelled of expensive perfume mixed with roasted meat. I recognized some faces from the society section of the local paper. Conversations hushed for a moment as I walked in. A few polite nods were exchanged, but I felt out of place, as if I had stepped into a world that was not mine. Then I heard Ben's voice cut through the noise. "Grandma," he ran across the room, his arms open wide. I knelt to hug him, breathing in the sweet scent of birthday cake on his cheeks. And for a second, everything felt right again. "Happy birthday, sweetheart," I whispered. "I made you something special." I reached into the bag, but Madison's hand was suddenly on Ben's shoulder. "Ben, remember what we talked about? Grandma needs to wash her hands first. Go play with your cousins." Her voice was firm, almost cold. I felt the sting in her words. She made me feel as if I were dirty, unworthy to hold my own grandson. I swallowed the hurt and nodded, but inside my heart sank. When dinner began, I found myself seated at the far end of the long dining table, squeezed between an empty chair and one of David's college friends, who spoke loudly about his latest real estate deal. The food looked exquisite on fine china plates, but I could barely taste it. Each bite felt dry and heavy in my mouth. Around me, the conversation revolved around vacation homes in the Hamptons and exclusive schools for their children. I had nothing to say that would matter to them. David glanced at me once during the appetizers and gave a weak smile. But when Madison leaned in to whisper something, he quickly looked away. So Eleanor Madison's voice carried down the table, silencing other conversations. "David tells me you still run that little business of yours." The way she said little sliced through me like glass. "Yes," I replied quietly, trying not to cause a scene. Madison let out a short laugh, as if I had told a charming joke. "Oh, how quaint." She turned to the woman beside her and added, "Eleanor cleans offices. Very humble work." The woman gave a tight smile and shifted slightly away from me. I had seen that movement before, the subtle recoil when someone decides you are beneath them. I lowered my gaze and tried to focus on my plate, but my hands trembled. I thought of the sweater still in the gift bag by my chair. I had spent weeks knitting it, imagining Ben's smile, but now I feared Madison would not even let me give it to him. My throat tightened when I saw Ben sneaking away from the children's table to climb onto my lap, his fingers sticky with chocolate frosting. "Grandma, can you tell me the story about the princess who saved herself?" His voice was soft and eager. It was our little tradition. I smiled and brushed a crumb from his cheek. Before I could start, Madison's voice cracked like a whip. "Ben, get down this instant. You will ruin your clothes." "But Mom, I want to hear Grandma's story." "Now," Madison said, pulling him off my lap with such force that he whimpered. She turned to me, her face flushed, eyes sharp. "I think it is time for you to leave." The room fell silent. Even the man talking about his business paused mid-sentence. I felt the eyes of 20 people on me watching my humiliation. "Please," I whispered. "It is Ben's birthday." "Security," Madison called out, though there was no security present. "Could someone escort this woman out? She is disturbing our dinner." I looked at David, hoping he would speak up, but he stared down at his plate. My heart cracked like old wood. I rose slowly, my knees shaking. I did not remember how I walked to the door. I only remember the sound of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears and the weight of silence that followed me. At the doorway, I turned once, but David still would not look at me. The night air was cool against my face as I stepped outside. My hands trembled so badly I could barely find my car keys. I sat in the driver's seat and looked at myself in the mirror. 67 hair silver from years of life and love, wearing my best dress that suddenly felt like rags. I looked exactly like what she had called me, a pauper. Ben's laughter and Madison's cutting voice echoed in my mind as I started the car and drove away, tears blurring the bright lights of the street. I drove home in silence, the car humming softly as the night blurred past. My chest felt hollow, but I refused to let the pain consume me. By the time I stepped into my apartment, I had folded the hurt into something smaller, something I could control. The place was quiet, the same way it had been every evening for years, with only the framed photos of David and Ben watching me from the shelves. I placed the unused gift bag on the kitchen counter and sat down, letting the weight of the evening settle over me like dust. For a long moment, I stared at my hands, the same hands that had built an empire. Madison had seen an old woman in a plain black dress, and that was all she needed to decide I was unworthy. She could not have been more wrong. I am not poor. I am not powerless. I am the founder and CEO of Hayes Innovations, a technology company that started in my garage 35 years ago when I was a single mother with nothing but determination. Back then, people laughed when I said I would launch a business. Women were not supposed to lead in tech. Investors brushed me off. Banks refused me loans. I taught myself coding at night while working 2 jobs to feed David. I sold my car, lived on instant noodles, and worked until my fingers cramped and my eyes burned. Slowly, my small software project turned into a product, then into a company, and eventually into a corporation that now employs over 2,000 people across several states. I leaned back in my chair and let the memory of those early years wash over me. The late nights, the failure, the people who said I would never succeed. I remembered crying on the kitchen floor when my first prototype failed, and then picking myself up to try again. It was not luck that got me here. It was grit, sacrifice, and the refusal to let others decide my worth. Tonight, Madison had reminded me of every condescending look and dismissive comment I had endured on my way up. She was not the first person to underestimate me. But she might be the one who needed the hardest lesson. I opened my laptop and logged into the company database. It was close to 10 at night, but I was wide awake. A storm was gathering inside me, steady and focused. I searched for Madison Hayes, marketing manager hired 18 months ago. Her file appeared filled with glowing reviews about her energy, creativity, and ability to impress clients. On the surface, she looked like a rising star. But I wanted to see the parts that were not on display. I called up the HR reports. 3 formal complaints from older employees stood out. Margaret Lee, 60, had reported that Madison mocked her methods during a campaign meeting, suggesting that she should step aside for someone younger. Robert Green, 58, claimed Madison pushed him to work unpaid overtime on her projects, calling him slow and outdated. Another file mentioned Sandra Ramirez, 64, who had been transferred to a less visible role after clashing with Madison about scheduling. All 3 complaints had been brushed aside by her supervisor, who credited Madison's high standards as the reason. My jaw tightened as I read the details. This was not ambition. This was bullying, and it had a pattern. I spent the next hour scrolling through emails and internal communications, and the picture became clearer. Madison thrived on belittling people who reminded her of the past she was trying to escape. She chased power because she feared being powerless again. I closed the laptop and stared at the dark window where my reflection looked back at me, calm but unshakable. I would not shout. I would not retaliate with anger. That would be too easy. I would hold her accountable not just for me, but for everyone she had hurt. The clock on the wall ticked past midnight, but I was not tired. I walked through the apartment, touching the framed photo of David as a boy, his smile bright and innocent. He had been my reason for everything. I wondered what he would think if he knew how his wife had treated me tonight. A pang of loneliness swept through me, but I pushed it aside. There was work to do. I brewed a cup of tea, the scent of chamomile filling the room, and sat down with my notebook to plan. By the time the first hint of dawn colored the sky, I had made my decision. Madison would learn that true power is not about money or appearances. It is about respect, and respect must be earned. The next morning, I sent an email to Human Resources. It sounded polite, even strategic, about implementing a cross-training initiative for mid-level managers. The goal I wrote was to help them understand every level of operations. Madison was the first name I placed on the list. By noon, she was reassigned to the basement kitchen of the headquarters, told it was temporary, but important for leadership development. I imagined her face when she learned she would be scrubbing dishes, and I felt a quiet sense of resolve rather than satisfaction. This was not about revenge. It was about perspective. I decided to see for myself how she would handle it. That Friday, I borrowed a uniform from facilities, a plain blue shirt and dark slacks, and tied my silver hair under a cap. I moved through the service corridor with a clipboard blending into the quiet hum of the kitchen staff. The smell of soap and warm bread filled the air, and the clang of pans echoed against metal counters. Madison stood at the sink wearing a thin apron and disposable gloves. Her designer nails were chipped, her expression a mix of anger and disbelief. Over the next 3 days, I returned each time unnoticed, observing from a distance as she muttered under her breath. She complained that this work was beneath her, that she was meant for bigger things. When Maria, one of the older kitchen workers, offered to show her how to handle the industrial sprayer, Madison brushed her off with a sharp tone. The words she used made my jaw tighten. She did not see the value in the people around her. To her, they were obstacles or reminders of something she wanted to forget. On the 4th afternoon, I overheard her speaking to a young man stacking trays. Her voice cracked slightly softer than before. She said she had grown up in a run-down neighborhood where people laughed at her thrift store clothes and called her trash. She said she had promised herself she would never go back. There was pain in her tone, an old wound she tried to cover with arrogance. I felt a flicker of understanding but stayed silent. Watching her cling to this brittle armor told me more than her polished smiles ever could. The time for confrontation was coming, but not yet. At 9:30 a.m., I told Helen to bring Madison to my office at 10. I wanted her to walk through the executive floor, past the polished marble and glass, past the portraits of company founders where my own face looked out over the lobby. I imagined the confusion in her eyes when she saw where she was headed. By the time the clock struck 10, I was seated behind my desk, the city skyline glowing through the floor-to-ceiling windows behind me. Helen's voice came over the intercom. "Mrs. Hayes, your 10 o'clock is here." "Send her in," I replied, my tone even and calm. Madison entered with hesitant steps, dressed not in her usual designer clothes, but in a simple blouse and jeans from the kitchen shift. Her hair was pulled back, and I could see the fatigue under her makeup. She started speaking before the door even closed. "I was told to come here about my reassignment. There must be a mistake." I turned my chair slowly to face her, letting recognition sink into her expression. Her jaw dropped and her voice stumbled over my name. "You. What are you doing here?" I folded my hands on the desk. "I am Eleanor Hayes, the founder and CEO of Hayes Innovations. You work for me." The silence stretched for a moment before she spoke again, her voice cracking. "You never said who you were. I thought you were just a—" She stopped, the word poor hanging unsaid between us. "I said I owned a business. You assumed the rest." Her eyes darted around the office, searching for some explanation. "I came here to talk about your behavior, Madison. Not just at my grandson's party, but here in this company." She sat down slowly, her face pale. "This is personal," she said. "You are punishing me because of what happened at the dinner." My voice remained calm. "What happened at the dinner only showed me what kind of person you are. But your record here shows much more." I turned the laptop screen toward her, revealing the HR reports, the employee complaints, the emails I had read late at night. Margaret Lee, Robert Greene, Sandra Ramirez. Names of people you belittled, people who gave this company decades of their lives. Madison's face flushed a mix of anger and embarrassment. Those were misunderstandings. I expect high performance. I do not accept excuses. I raised an eyebrow. High performance does not mean humiliating your colleagues. It does not mean pushing older employees out because you think they cannot keep up. Her hands clenched in her lap. "So this is revenge. You want to see me fail because I did not respect you at dinner." "No," I said, leaning forward. "I want you to understand that respect is not optional. It is the foundation of every team and every family." My voice softened slightly. "You treated me like I was nothing because you believed I had nothing. That same belief has poisoned how you treat others." For a moment, she looked as if she would argue again, but then her shoulders slumped. "I have fought my entire life to never feel small," she whispered. "You think I enjoy being cruel? I grew up in a trailer park where people mocked me for the clothes I wore, for the way I spoke. I worked through college cleaning other people's bathrooms. Every time I see someone who reminds me of that girl, I push back because if I don't, I feel like I am her again." Her voice trembled, and for the first time I saw the child she used to be, the one who had been told she was worthless. My heart softened, but I did not let my resolve fade. "Madison," I said, "I know what it is like to be underestimated. I started this company with nothing but an idea and a second-hand computer. People laughed at me too, but I never tore anyone down to build myself up." The room was quiet except for the faint hum of the city outside. She looked at me, tears forming in her eyes. So what now? Are you going to fire me? I studied her for a long moment. That depends on you. You can return to the kitchen and finish your training, learn something about the people who keep this company running. Or you can resign and I will provide a neutral reference for your next job. Her lips tightened. That is not a choice, she said. It is a lesson. I nodded. Yes, it is. You can choose to learn it or walk away unchanged. She sat in silence, the weight of the decision pressing down on her. Finally, she said quietly, I will stay. I will finish what I started. I want to prove I can be better. I leaned back in my chair, watching her face. I hope you mean that, Madison. Because if you do not, you will leave me no choice but to let you go. She stood slowly, her hands shaking. I am not used to being looked at this way, she said. I always thought power meant never letting anyone see your weakness. Power, I replied, is about how you treat people when no one is watching. Remember that. As she left the office, I felt both relief and a strange ache. I wanted her to change, not for me, but for herself, and for the family she had nearly destroyed. Whether she would or not was still uncertain. David came to my apartment one quiet Saturday morning, his face lined with exhaustion but softer than it had been in months. He stood in the doorway for a moment, then stepped inside with a heavy sigh. I am sorry, Mom, he said, his voice low and raw. I should have defended you. I should have seen who she really was. His words were not sharp, but trembling like they had waited too long to be spoken. I reached for his hand and told him that I forgave him, though I knew forgiveness would take time to grow fully between us. Ben's laughter in the background on his phone call filled the silence and reminded me why this healing mattered. 2 weeks later, Madison sent her resignation letter. It arrived on thick white stationery, every word carefully written. She said she was starting therapy to face the anger and fear she had carried since childhood. At the end, she wrote, I will always regret the way I treated you. I hope one day I can show you that I am more than my worst moments. I read it twice, feeling no triumph, but a quiet sense of release. Sometimes people break before they can rebuild, and I hoped she would find a better way forward. Spring came slowly with pale green leaves and cool mornings. Ben and I spent an afternoon at the park, spreading a blanket under an oak tree near the playground. He ran to me with sand clinging to his shoes, waving a stick like a sword. Tell me the story about the brave Queen Grandma, he said with wide eyes. I smiled and began letting the story weave through the breeze. Watching him laugh, I realized this was the only victory that mattered. I had fought for my place in his life, and I would protect that place with everything I had. At work, I began a scholarship program for employees' children and grandchildren, including those who had been overlooked or dismissed in the past. Janet, who had once worked nights because of Madison's complaints, was promoted to a supervisory role with the respect she deserved. Robert Green was leading a new project and smiling in meetings again. I could feel the company culture shifting like sunlight breaking through after a long storm. People who had felt small now walked with a sense of value, and that filled me with pride. On a warm evening in May, I sat on my balcony with a cup of tea looking at the city lights. Justice had not been loud or cruel. It had been steady, built on choices that restored dignity rather than destroyed it. I thought about Madison, about the pain that shaped her, and felt no anger anymore. What lingered instead was hope that she would one day understand that real strength comes from kindness. As I closed my eyes, I felt peace settle over me. I had reclaimed my family, my company, and my place in the world, not by fighting for power, but by standing firm in love and respect.